Hello, and welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors and other inspiring guests, doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. This week, I'm speaking to the wonderful Wiz Wharton, who is of Chinese and white European heritage. Wiz's debut novel, Ghost Girl Banana, follows Suk Yin in 1960s England, exiled from Kowloon, and her daughter Lily in the 1990s. Lily embarks on a secret pilgrimage to Hong Kong to discover the lost side of her identity, following a mysterious letter telling her that she has inherited a lot of money from a stranger. It's no surprise that this sweeping story is being adapted for TV, and it is such a brilliant read. Wiz Wharton was born in London of Chinese European heritage. She is a prize-winning graduate of the National Film and Television School, where she studied screenwriting under the filmmakers Mike Leigh, Frears and Kenith Trodd. Her debut novel, Ghost Girl Banana, deals with issues of identity, belonging, and familial secrets. In 2023, she was named by the Scottish Government Expo Fund as one of the 40 writers predicted to set the literary world alight. I'm so glad she's my guest today. Hello, Wiz. Welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf. It's so wonderful to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you, Samia. And it's a huge privilege to be here on the podcast. And thank you for inviting me.
I have read your novel, Ghost Girl Banana, which, oh my gosh, I really loved it. I have to start off by saying it is a dual timeline narrative, which is one of my favorite forms of novels. Honestly, I love dual timelines. I find them so fascinating. And sometimes I find that you don't love one timeline as much as you love the other, and you don't really see you don't see the connection so clearly, but I think you did it so beautifully. And I was fully invested in both timelines. Well done on creating such a masterpiece, and thank you for your work. But yeah, I think it's such a wonderful novel. It's been out for over a year now. It is out in paperback at the moment as well, so that's always great, a bit more lighter on the pocket for people as well. So I hope that more people will be picking it up. It is such an important book. I think you tell the stories that we don't always hear about. You're shedding light on a part of history that we actually collectively don't know much about at all. So I think that's super brilliant. So actually, to begin with, would you mind introducing your novel?
Yes, as you say, Ghost Girl Banana is a dual timeline, dual narrative set in Hong Kong in 1997, on the cusp of the handover back to Britain. And then the previous timeline involves the mother Suk Yin in the 1960s as a migrant to the UK. And Suk Yin, at the start of the novel, her daughter Lily doesn't remember much about her mother because she died when she was very young. And then 30 years later, she receives this mysterious letter informing her that she's been left a vast amount of money in a very rich businessman's will. The condition being that she must return to Hong Kong in order to claim the inheritance. And in so doing, Lily starts to unravel the received narrative of her mother's past and the secrets of her family that she's never been privy to.
Yeah, I think it's such a wonderful story, and we find out really early on in the novel that Lily has been left this money, which to me is like the ultimate dream. Who wouldn't want to be left £1 million by someone you don't know, a complete stranger, but has links to your family? I just feel like that is one of the things that you know that will never happen in your life, but it was happening to Lily, and it made, when we read the book, it made complete sense why that was the case. It wasn't just a scam, which is what
Yeah, exactly. But it obviously nothing is ever that easy. As Lily's mum says, there's no such fat goose lying in the road, and it's a bit of a poison chalice, as it turns out. As she goes on this incredible journey, and not only find herself but her past as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Ghost Girl Banana is your first published novel, but it isn't your first adventure into writing. You've been writing for years, nonfiction, but also screenwriting. So what's it like for you exploring these different forms of writing? And what were you able to bring from the past writing experience to when it came to writing a novel, which is very different?
It's extremely different. So I trained as a screenwriter initially, and that's what I thought I would go on to do. Previously, when I was younger, I'd written plays for the stage that had been put on by the Royal Court, and I just thought that was going to be my future. It was only later on that I really fell in love with long form. But it's a very different beast. Because I think novels allow you that level of introspection which you can't get with screenplays. Have to be, by nature of their form, very hooky and dramatic, and everything has to be shown on screen, essentially. And I really enjoyed the ability to go further into the psyches of my characters and have that little bit of introspection. But then I think I did bring some skills from screenwriting in terms of knowing what works dramatically and how a story unfolds, because screenwriting is very precise on structure. And I think that was a really good tool that I had in my arsenal when I went on to do long form.
Mm.
But my life has come full circle because I'm currently working on the screenplay of Ghost Girl Banana.
Yeah.
So it's been lovely. It's been lovely to revisit that skill.
Yeah. And I do I was really like reading the book, I was very engaged, and it has almost in some ways like a thriller like quality to it, in that we're trying to understand what's happened. We're with Lily on this journey in Hong Kong in a place she doesn't know, she's never been before. She's trying to uncover, and she's got this ticking, it's like a ticking time bomb, right?
Yes,
Because she's
yes.
got a limited time, she has to leave within 6 days or something. She's going to be thrown out of this hotel that she's being very kindly put up by this very wealthy family, but she needs to leave. She's with her passport, but she's desperate to not only find out what happened, but then to make a decision about whether or not she wants to accept the inheritance. And there's a whole load of things going on, and it's fascinating because I couldn't predict in any way what the reality was going to be, like what the big secret was around Lily's mother's death. And normally I feel like I'm quite good. Normally I feel like I can figure out that it's something to do with this. I was completely off. I was completely off. So I was very shocked. I loved the twist. I thought it was brilliant. But I guess it's not really a twist. It's just something that I don't think was going to happen. But it was really good. And I can see, and now that you've said it, that sort of understanding what works well in terms of suspense from a film or a TV perspective. Because myself, generally, I don't read a huge number of thrillers, but I love it on screen.
Yes, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do, and I wonder if it's just you're sitting there and you're in the moment, and
Mm.
the adrenaline gets pumping, and it's very visual. And I'm exactly the same. I don't read a lot of thrillers, but I like to watch them,
Yeah.
and it is that immediacy. I think, a captive audience. But I'm so glad you said that about the ending, because I think I do read some books where they have a twist and they had no connection to what's gone before. And I wanted there to be a surprise, but also to have an inbuilt logic to why things that had happened. And,
Yeah.
and that was the reason why. So I'm so pleased, that you felt satisfied by it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I understand that I guess what sort of sparked you writing Ghost Girl Banana was coming across some essentially diaries and letters that were left behind by your mother, which documented her arrival from China into the UK and her experiences. Can you tell me a little bit about what that was like? And then but I also know that Ghost Girl Banana it's not your mother's memoir, it's not your family story, but I guess in many ways it's a tribute and it's inspired by it. So what was it like? You in some ways were on a similar journey to Lily in understanding more about your mother's experiences and your family story. And then at the same time crafting this novel.
Yeah, it was. I say this in the dedications at the back, the acknowledgements, that I never really envisaged it as a novel. So it was really a personal journey that I was on, which began, as you say, when I was moving house to Scotland and discovered at the bottom of a box this just series of floppy disks that had belonged to my mum. And all they said on them was Alice, my story. And I had no idea what they were. I had no ability to read them because they were on the old format floppy disks. And it was only my sister who took them and had them converted. And she rang me and she said, Wiz, you'll never guess what these are. And she said, it's Mum's diaries. And they'd been dating back to a long, long time. And she'd obviously transcribed them onto a word processor. And the thing about my mum, and many women of her generation, they were very stoic about their experiences. They'd come to a completely different culture. They tried to assimilate and all the sacrifices and compromises entailed, but they were here. And my mum's big thing was that she didn't want to look back on the trauma of the past. She just wanted to move forward. And as a result, she never really spoke about those hard times. And so when she passed away, I didn't really feel I had a handle on who she was as a person and what she had been through. I knew what my experiences were growing up as mixed race, but I didn't know how they related to her experiences. And so just reading these diaries was, for one, an immense privilege, because had I not had them, I probably would never have known who she really was.
Mm.
And so going through them, it was really a chance to quite a cathartic opportunity to learn about her and to realize what an incredible mum she had been. And I always knew that she was, but it augmented that sense. And so it began as I wanted to write a tribute to her, and not just her, but all the hidden women of her generation whose stories never get told in the mainstream fiction space. And I thought, I really want to do this tribute to her. And it was only as I started writing, it's still as a sort of a letter to her, really, about a thank you that I wanted to give to her, that I started to see the parallels between my own experiences of growing up and the compromises that you make when you're trying to assimilate, and the guilt and the shame that comes with that sometimes. And although it was Suk Yin's story to begin with, I started to weave in the idea of her daughter and this whole idea of the tapestry of the past impinging on the present. And in doing so, I think it was an amazing personal journey for me in understanding and overcoming some of my feelings of shame and guilt growing up. And at the same time, a friend of mine, I passed the beginning pages to her, and she just said, Wiz, this is it. You have to send this to somebody. And I'd been trying for a long time at this point to get into fiction with no success. And people were saying to me, you can definitely write, but nobody wants to read these stories. And so I never thought the chance would come. And then whether it's the zeitgeist or just the political temperature of times at the moment, I sent it to 6 agents and they all offered me rep within a week. And it was just mind-blowing and overwhelming. But I was so proud for my mum that finally, and like I say, women of her generation, that their story would get told. But at the same time, as I say, it's been a very emotional and beautiful journey for me as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think, yeah, the character of Suk Yin also, I think, in many ways is very stoic and very reserved, but she is at the same time like full of emotion constantly, whether it's homesickness or guilt, or whether it's sometimes it's frustration with her family and anger at her brother and resentment. But sometimes it's also love. It's love for her children and love for her husband. And we don't really see those displays of affection, which I guess is similar in your experiences with your mother, but I would say the same with mine. My mother also moved to the UK from Pakistan in the 70s, and I think that it's very common in that generation to hold back in some ways. And I think there's a plethora of reasons and complexities about that. But I think I was really taken by her story because it just felt like one that will resonate with so many people, and one that I think is so reflective of the situation that so many people found themselves in moving. And that is also very like interconnected. People didn't move to the UK out of pure free will, right? It was
Exactly.
circumstances which was impacted by Britain's actions anyway, right? It's not it wasn't just that somebody came because they thought they'd have a better chance or a better life. It's not that black and white.
No,
People don't
exactly.
leave their home
Yeah.
for a simple reason like that.
I think that's very true. And also, a lot of it came out of Britain's colonialism and
Absolutely.
the sense that they needed people to come over to do the jobs that white Britons didn't want to do.
Yeah.
For example, within the NHS, there was a massive dearth of people willing to go into the NHS. And a lot of immigrants came over from the West Indies as well in the Windrush generation to do those jobs. And yet, while they were serving the interests of their colonial masters, they were derided at the same time for being other. And I really wanted to tell that side of the story as well. And I think it's important. I was very lucky to have my mum's diaries, but another consequence of writing the book, which readers have been so generous in sharing with me, is that they have now gone back to their parents, if they're second generation immigrants, and they said, tell me your story. Because they don't want to be in the position where they don't have that legacy when their parents pass on. And I think we are all a product of our past and our heritage, whatever that may be, whatever denomination or culture you come from. I think it's very important to pay homage to where you've been and where
Yeah.
your parents are from.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think when it comes to like colonial history, there are sources and books and information available, but for so long it has been from the white lens or from the colonial perspective.
Yeah.
And what we haven't had enough of until fairly recently, I think this is a very recent thing, I would say in the last decade, is voices actually from the people themselves, from Chinese people, from Pakistani, from Indians. Like we haven't had it for so long. And I've heard you actually mention before that this was really important for you when doing your own research, was to make sure that the sources that you were looking at in order to develop this story were not just, I guess, the colonial lens or the colonial mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of history, I think that Lily says it in the novel as well, that it's the winners that make the maps.
Yeah.
So generally the history books from until very recently have been through a very white gaze. And so when I was researching some of the historical details about migration and what it felt like to migrate, I was very keen to look at first-hand reports, interviews, written interviews, YouTube videos, and they told a tale which was very different. It wasn't the British perspective of we gave you a home, you should be so grateful. It was about the struggles and the compromises, and the genuine desire to assimilate,
Mm-hmm.
but the struggles that happened with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was incredibly important to me.
Yeah. And in the novel, and I think in your own lived experience as well, there's almost like a further layer of this assimilation and complexity around identity, because we're dealing with people that are of mixed race heritage.
Yeah.
So in my case, both my parents are Pakistani, which means that although like I've had a huge number of issues when it comes to assimilation and acceptance and identity, but I guess at least within me, when I think about my heritage, it's clear cut to me what my heritage is. And although my identity is, I'm very much British, I've been born and brought up and lived my entire life in this country, I can't imagine considering anywhere else home.
Mm.
But I think there is the conflict is different. And Lily and her sister are mixed race. Their mother, Sukyun, is Chinese and their father, he's English. And that poses for them a huge number of issues as they're growing up, and even much later for Lily as well. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you about what it is about this experience, about growing up as a mixed race
Mm.
person, a mixed race Chinese person. What were you interested in bringing out through your work?
The metaphorical idea of statelessness. psychologically was really important to me. The title in itself is a reflection of that because Lily is referred to as a Gwaimoi, which in Cantonese means ghost girl, and that's by her Chinese uncle, Sukyin's brother. And that is, his way of saying that she is a foreigner, essentially, and not recognizing the duality of her heritage. She's not Chinese enough. And I think Lily looks Chinese, whereas Maya has always passed as white. So there's that added level of complexity in that Lily perceives that Maya has never been through the same problems that she has had growing up. But I was really interested in how, and my own experience of growing up was almost having a dual personality, whereas behind closed doors, we were very much able to celebrate my mum's culture in the food, some of the language, the festivals, the religions. But as soon as we were outside in the wider English community, that was something that we were taught to hide. And that was very difficult, especially when you're a young child trying to come to terms with, and which led to a lot of feelings of guilt and shame that I didn't look like everybody else that I was at school with. And so that's what I was trying to get across, that, as I say, that psychological state of being in limbo. I think you're on this spectrum always between betrayal and compromise. Whereas if you're not Chinese enough, you're betraying your culture. Whereas you're not white enough in your attempts to assimilate. And that's a very tough place to be, I think, growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. And the title of the book is Ghost Girl Banana. And you mentioned what Ghost Girl means, where it comes from, both in the novel, but generally. And also the term banana is one that I'm very familiar with. But for anyone listening that doesn't know what it means, it refers to a person who is Chinese or looks like they're from that part of the world, has quote unquote yellow skin. I wouldn't ever say that a Chinese person has yellow skin, but okay, let's go with that. But internally, this person is white. So it's just this idea that you may look outwardly one race, but you behave as though you are British or English, whatever it is. And obviously, like, we have the same for the South Asian brown people. It's the word coconut.
Yes,
like you look brown on the outside, but really you behave or you think of yourself as a white person.
yes.
And it's an insult, but it's almost like a political term, I would say now as well, like a political insult. But it is this idea that like you are always considered in some ways to either two different people or two parts of your identity rather than a whole. A banana is a whole fruit, but it's this idea that you're not who you are all the way through. You're different to how you look on the outside and who you are inside. And I think that is something that so many of us, especially like children of immigrants, continue to struggle with, because the communities and the places that our parents left decades ago have also changed. And we've grown up in a completely different place. The connection between the two and trying to find, I don't know, similarities and comfort and home in both places is very difficult. But the problem with that is that then you constantly are searching for belonging and safety and home and may never fully find it, which is, I think, is a really sad reality. But I'm really interested in this idea of using the term girl, because I know that I've read a lot of books set in sort of Vietnam, and they also have this idea of the soul and the other world. And I just wondered if you could reflect a little bit on about, maybe, is there something a little bit more than just, oh, you don't fit, you don't look like one of us?
Yeah, completely. I think there is that political aspect to it, the way that other nations immediately want to compartmentalize you into a certain type based on where you're from, but on a metaphysical or a spiritual level. And a lot of belief systems in the world have this, but it's very pertinent to Southeast Asian religions where ghosts feature very fully in lots of the legends. And it generally refers to a soul which has unresolved business on earth and is therefore left lost and wandering in limbo whilst they search for resolution. And I think that was a really pertinent analogy for Lily, especially because at the start of the novel, she is looking for resolution in her economic state, her mental state, her state with her sister, and also in not knowing or suspecting that the received narrative she has had of her mother is not the whole story. And so she does fit into that category of being a ghost where she is drifting in limbo on Earth, but with very many unresolved issues.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. And I think it's only maybe about halfway through that we come across the phrase in the book. And so up until that point, I wasn't sure. I couldn't figure out like where it come from or what it meant. But as soon as it was mentioned in the book, I just felt like I really felt it. I felt like this is like such a powerful idea and it is very insulting as a living person to be compared to a ghost, which implies also that you're not alive, right? That you're not a functioning human being. And I think that is very difficult. And another added complexity for Lily, for so many people, about, again, this idea of where do you fit in? You're from neither here and you're from neither there, which I guess is what ghosts are. They're not alive anymore, but they're not at peace enough to be fully, I don't know, initiated into the next realm or the next world, whatever your view on that is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as I say, I think it serves as a sort of metaphor for the way that a lot of mixed race people feel, how they're not regarded as valid, almost tangible, valid person. I spoke before about how often we're fractionated by other people. You're half this, you're half that. I actually have a T-shirt, which I love, which says both, not half on it.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's how I feel. And that may not been how I felt when I was younger, because the terminology around that has changed as well. But I definitely feel that I am more than a fraction of the whole. And I'm incredibly proud of that duality. I think it's given me so much in my life that I wouldn't have had as a single culture kid.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking about Lily, actually, so Lily is, as you said, she's dealing with so many different things: her mental health, her financial situation, but also she's got this relationship with her sister that seems very complex. Now, I love reading about sisters because I have a sister and I love her dearly, but we have had a strange relationship over the years. She's also slightly older than me. But I think it's one of the most brilliant relationships to read about and also even to watch. One of my favorite books that I read even as a young child and then I watched were Little Women, and it was my favorite, just knowing that there's these four sisters and they love and they hate each other all at the same time.
Yes.
But as you mentioned before, there's this added complexion in that Maya and Lily also look very different. And Maya can pass as a white person and Lily doesn't. And there's a really shocking scene in the book where there's a party and Maya's friends can't believe that Lily is her sister because it doesn't make sense in their mind. It doesn't make sense. But what were some of the things you were interested to talk about when it comes to sisters?
Like yourself, I'm endlessly fascinated by that dynamic. I'm a sister myself, and I love reading about sisters, virgin suicides, Little Women, and I think it is a very complex relationship because you think about your friends, your relationship with your friends or your co-workers, and there can be competitiveness and there can be rivalry. But I don't think it's ever as strong as with your own sister because you grow up and from a very early age, you're already competing for things with your caregivers, your mutual caregivers, whether that's love or affection or admiration. And so you learn from a very early age that the dynamic is there, that you're fighting for something. And the way that you can like you say, love your sister. You can't choose them, but you can love them very deeply, but you may not always like them.
Yes.
But then as you get older and you go through things like grief, loss, you also rely on your sister or your sibling to corroborate your memories about your
Mm.
past, your shared history, your shared past. And I was really interested in what would happen between siblings if that narrative was different for each of them. And it appeared that one had different memories to what she was being told, and how that would play out in terms of the ongoing relationship between the two sisters. And Lily being the younger sister and not remembering Sukyin, whereas Maya does remember Sukyin, that's difficult as well, because she's relying on Maya to fill in the blanks
Mm.
and trusting that those blanks are being filled in properly or truthfully. But I don't want to give away spoilers or whatever, but it's only when you confront, I think, the truth of things that you can then move forward in a sense
Mm.
of understanding, who your sister really is, and why
Mm.
they've done certain things, and the way that your lives have turned out so differently.
Yeah. I thought it was so beautifully done, because that older sister, younger sister relationship is also just really like very special, but also we see it. We see how difficult it is. On the surface, Maya's life looks extremely well put together. She's married, she's doing really well in her career, she's got loads of money, huge house, lots of friends. At one point, she's got a baby along the way. It just looks like all the parts of her life are falling together, whereas Lily, her life seems to be crumbling. And this again, I feel like as a young sister, I often feel like this. I feel like my sister has the most perfect life and mine is a mess. And but actually, when we scratch beneath the surface and we see that it's not like that. Nobody has a perfect life.
Mm,
And but the older sister in many ways maybe feels like she has to present her life in a certain way and keep it together for the both of them, but is equally dealing with her own things. As we discover, Maya's life is not perfect, it's far from perfect. And she's not only is she dealing with things in her life currently, but she's dealing with a whole burden of guilt and stress from her past, which she has not been able to deal with, because not only, I mean, we know really early on in the book that Sukyin has passed away, but also like where they've lost their father, which we also know early on, so no spoilers. Um, and that's a lot for anybody to deal with. And yeah, I really love that, because I know from my own personal experiences, I often will feel like, even if my sister had it tough growing up, like at least now she's good and I'm not. I'm dealing with X, Y, and Z. And then she will say something, it might be something really small, but I will just be like, oh my gosh, okay, her life is not perfect. And that sort
yeah,
of like awakening moment is not just because I'm being selfish in the moment, but I think because she's my older sister, I almost assume that everything's good, even if, yeah,
yeah.
it's probably not.
I'm exactly the same with my sister. She's
Mm.
had an amazing career, and from a very young age, and been very successful. And it's always, oh, it's okay for you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think one of the important messages in the book is that the surface of things is very deceptive. And
Mm.
whereas Lily, in a very tangible way, is suffering, I think with Maya, it's a lot more concealed.
Mm.
And but at the same time, she feels that she has to carry the burden of appearing to have a very sorted life, for reasons which become obvious as the book goes on. But in fact, and I think it's quite topical in the age of social media, where we see very beautifully curated lives in little squares, and it gives rise to all sorts of insecurities within us that we don't have that life. And I think it's
Mm.
very important to remember that what's posted is a very filtered account of what
Yeah.
real life is, and we should never take anything for granted, because we don't know
Mm.
what somebody's private suffering is.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I just I think it was just so wonderful, I think, to see two sisters in a novel that really do care about each other, but are dealing with things themselves in their own private lives. But I just want to go back to this point you made earlier in that Maya is trying in some ways to alter or dictate in some ways Lily's memories of the past. So it's not just about she's trying to control her in her life right now, because she's not trying to do that, but she is trying to feed a certain narrative about the past. So when Lily will remember something, she'll say, "Oh, I remember the smell, I remember the food."
Yeah.
Maya will just say, "No, you were too young. There's no way that you can remember it."
Yeah.
And I just feel like that's also very typically Big Sister. But it's really interesting in that Maya was so determined to put forward a particular perspective or a particular narrative about what had happened or what hadn't happened. And it wasn't that she had all the information or had a full story. There were just, I guess she wanted to keep it settled enough that Lily would not dig. She didn't want Lily to go on this journey, which she ended up going anyway without telling her sister, and to actually uncover what had happened. What is your perspective on this idea of trying to conceal something in this particular way when you're almost, it does verge on, I don't know, manipulation in some ways, but I do think it comes from a place of love, because we do know that Maya is very conscious of Lily's mental health struggles.
Yes.
And she doesn't want Lily to spiral or to worsen or to have to deal with anything when it comes to her mental health. But at the same time, is there an element that Maya is trying to hide something because she has felt for so long that she is potentially responsible or involved or guilty in some ways? What's your view on that?
It's completely both those things. Maya has essentially been Lily's caregiver and a mother replacement, a surrogate mother, since they were quite young. And I think she takes that role very seriously, especially with Lily's history of poor mental health. She doesn't want her to do anything which would potentially cause her to spiral again, because she does love her and she values her as a sister. And she wants to do everything in her power to care for Lily. But at the same time, her actions in the novel are very much motivated by a subconscious level of responsibility for what she may or may not have done in the past to have caused certain things to happen. And that's an incredibly huge psychological burden for her. And it's only towards the end when a character says to Lily, you have to look beyond how things may seem and to acknowledge that often when things appear to be done out of spite or hatred, they're actually done because somebody is desperate to be loved. And I think there is this deep craving within Maya to be approved of by her sister, to be held up as this standard of somebody who is a good sister. And it's something which Lily questions throughout the novel. Is Maya a good sister? Why has she been telling me things that aren't true? Why is she hiding stuff? Why is she gaslighting me? And a massive part of her journey is discovering the reasons for that. But yeah, it's really interesting. I did a candid book club very recently, and one of the people had just finished reading, and they were like, I don't know if I forgive Maya. I don't know if I like Maya. And everybody else was jumping to Maya's defense, saying, oh, but don't you think, and don't you think? I think she is quite divisive because she makes choices which maybe are not hers to make about what is appropriate to remember and what is not appropriate to remember. And at the end of the day, we're all entitled to have our own memories of things, I think, and not have them curated or changed by other people.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a really tough one. I don't know if I forgive Maya either, but because I can completely see why she did what she did. I just don't think that it was necessarily the right thing to do. And I think Lily had so much angst about everything. And I guess she was gaslit for so for so long, because every time she thought she remembered something or she thought she understood something, her sister was there to tell her, no, you don't, which is not very nice. But we have spoken quite a few times actually today about how so many of the characters are feeling a level of guilt. And I guess it starts with, even in Sukhin's experience living in the UK, marrying a white man, not being able to visit her mother or being in touch with her family enough. But then we also see it with Lily and with Maya. And I really appreciated that, because I think there are so many different elements to the experience of being children of immigrants or being an immigrant yourself. Obviously, I'm not an immigrant, so I can't speak to that particular experience, but I think guilt is one of the things that I haven't seen reflected too much in literature, but I really felt it throughout the novel. And it's something in my own life that I think of, and I have experienced a lot, constantly feeling guilty about not being the right kind of person, or not being enough for my parents, or not thinking about what if my parents hadn't left Pakistan and what kind of life would I then have, and am I then guilty of complaining, all of these sorts of things. But what were you particularly interested in about when it comes to this idea of guilt? What do you think about it?
As I said, I grew up with a lot of embarrassment when I was younger, because I saw the reactions of other people around me to the fact that I was the child of two different races, and their disapproval of a mixed race marriage in those days. And that in turn made me feel that there was something wrong with me as the product of that marriage. And with that embarrassment came a lot of shame. And I think shame and guilt are very closely aligned.
Yeah.
But as I've got older, and it's really funny, I saw an interview with Zadie Smith recently, and she was saying that guilt and shame get get a really bad rap these days. People say, we shouldn't be ashamed of anything, own it and be proud. But I also think that having that sense of guilt and shame can be quite corrective, because they make you reflect, especially when you're older, about why you might feel this way about things. And so, for example, when I was younger, I wouldn't call people out on the names that they called me, or things like being at work and people calling me Yoko and stuff like that. I wouldn't call them out on it. I know, it's just awful.
It's horrible.
I know, and ignorant. But I was afraid to, but I was also embarrassed as well to stand out in that way to other people. And it was only as I got a little bit older that I started to think, why am I ashamed? And what does this mean? And that I started to, and I suppose also realizing at that stage a lot more about my mum and the stuff that she had to go through at work. She'd had very similar experiences, and we had a common thread between us in that sense. And if you're able to sit with those feelings and to question them, I think it can be quite corrective, because then you learn to challenge them. And in much the same way that it plays out between Lily and Maya, who their whole relationship is this crucible of guilt and shame, I think. It's only by confronting that and questioning it together, and the way they've been controlled by it, I think, from their past, they are able to move forward in a spirit of truth and forgiveness. And so dealing with my own feelings of guilt and shame has allowed me to not only move past it, but to actually be actively proud of where I'm from. And so I don't think guilt and shame are something to be worried about, as long as you can, like I say, sit with those feelings and interrogate them and wonder, is the fault with me actually, or is it with the way that other people operate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially you having this common thread with your mother about some of the experiences that she had when she was working, I think that there is always this burden that our parents did so much and endured so much for us to be right here, right now in this particular situation. And then there is a sense of like responsibility, but also guilt, like I didn't ask them to do it, but I know that
Yes.
that they endured so much. And what do we do with that? And actually, I wanted to ask you. So I know that you, growing up, you were actually geared towards like a science and maths route at school, and you had an offer from Oxford University, no less, to study medicine, which you turned down and went to the arts route. Now, I have a very similar background. So I was doing my A levels initially. I was also guided to the science and maths route. I started my A levels and I did a year, and it just wasn't working. I had really decent GCSE grades, and so it felt like on the surface that there's no reason why I just wouldn't get on with them.
Yes.
But I just couldn't do it, and I tried so hard. And my parents couldn't get their head around this idea. They were just like, but you're so smart, like how is this not happening? And you should be doing sciences. If you don't want to be a doctor, it's okay, you can do something else, but like do it in do it in this sphere. And it just got to the point where I was like, I cannot, like I just can't carry on with this. And my school intervened. It was actually a very traumatic experience. And so I ended up restarting my A levels. I redid year 12, which was also horrible, but I redid year 12 and I did art subjects. I did like politics, history, English, psychology, and I thrived. And I ended up 2 years later at Cambridge doing social political science. And so I always feel like, okay, I know that this is the path that I was meant to take.
Yeah.
But my gosh, the guilt during that time was immense. It was, I think, possibly the thing that I continue to look back at that time. Although I'm certain that I made the right decision, I still can't help. I can't shake it. I can't shake this idea that this is what my parents wanted of me and for me. In some ways, they had very legitimate reasons for wanting it, because that was their worldview and it made sense. And it's not wrong. It's just a worldview that I don't subscribe to. And yeah, and I just can't shake it. And I wonder if you, because it must have been very difficult for you as well.
It was incredibly difficult. And I think it is our parents and people who have migrated to a different culture and know that the suffering that they've had, they don't want that to be revisited onto their children.
Yes.
And their perception is that if you get a great job, if you have a great education, then the doors of life will open to you into not having the life that they had. And so I think motivation is completely understandable. And I never was cross that my mom did that. But I also think that society pushes this model minority myth onto Chinese people or Asian people, that if you're smart, and my school did it, if you're fairly smart, oh, you must want to be a doctor or a dentist or go into law or be a vet or whatever. And so I grew up thinking, oh, I'm going to be a doctor. And that was the path that was carved out for me. And then I didn't think I would have any chance at doing medicine. So when I got the offer from Oxford, I was horrified. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do this, because I always wanted to write. I always wanted to go into that field. But it just wasn't an acceptable path for my mum. How are you going to earn money? What if nobody likes what you do? And blah, blah, blah. Whereas it was a very certain path if I did medicine. And turning it down was incredibly difficult for me in terms of feeling guilty.
Yeah.
I let my mum down, even though she acknowledged that it was my life and I had to do what I wanted to do. And she always wanted me to be happy, I think. But there was still the perception of her Chinese friend, like, I know that you'd given up this kind of massive opportunity, and her relatives and so forth. But I think it's taken me a long time, but it's worked out in the end. And I think my mum would be proud. And I think she was proud of whatever I chose to do. But I do agree that it's very difficult. And I do still think back, oh, where would I have been now if I had become a doctor? But yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, it's funny because when young people come to me now and ask me or tell me about their struggles with choosing their A-level subjects or their degree choices, my first response is always, are you sure you want to ask me? Like,
yeah, exactly.
I would advise you something. You will have to deal with the guilt that you're going to carry.
It's real. The struggle is real, I think. Yeah. And you do feel this sense of ingratitude that you're turning down this opportunity. But I think ultimately you do have to go with your heart. And I'm not a spring chicken anymore. It's taken me a long time to get to this point. But I don't regret it, because I feel that ultimately we are where we're meant to be,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in that as well. Like I do know objectively that, and personally within me, very deep within me, that was the right choice, and it completely changed my life. This podcast would not be here had I studied sciences. I wouldn't. I can't see it playing out that I would be as knee deep in the world of literature as I am if I had taken a completely different route. And I'm so grateful for this path. And so like to be able to connect with authors like you and to read your work and to be able to then talk about it in depth, because a book, your book must be what, just over 300 pages or so,
Yes.
which I read in a matter of days, but I know you would have spent a lot longer working on it. But the amount of time that and the thought that goes into it, I mean, I do think that Lily and Maya and Sukying will stay with me for a long time. Really wonderful characters. And and I know that obviously this is not your family story, it's not your mother's story, but how much of yourself would you say has gone into this novel and comes out in these characters?
I definitely think that the emotional truth of what I've been through is reflected in a
Mm.
lot of the characters. And as I said, I've been Maya. I've been that kind of person on the receiving end of that model minority thing where I've taken a certain path in life academically. I've been Lily, obviously, because I have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and I've known what it is to struggle psychologically and also economically because of my choices and because of my health. And now as a mother, I know what it is to be Sukyin
Mm.
and to have this boundless love for my kid and to want him to do what makes him happy, and a fierce protectiveness of him, and also an appreciation of wanting him to love who he is and to have an understanding of his heritage and his legacy. And so I think I am all those women. And
Mm.
it's one of the things that's been so wonderful amidst all the wonderful letters I've had from readers is that a lot of men have been in touch as well to say, I know these are women, but
Mm.
I feel them, and I feel I identify with Lily, I identify with Maya. And so that's been, you can be shortlisted for all the prizes, Samir, and you can have this and have that. But when somebody takes the time to write to you and say, this book has touched me in that way,
Mm.
that makes all the years of trying just worth it.
Yeah,
And that's who it's
absolutely.
for. It's for the readers. It's for
Mm.
people to finally see themselves in a book, which I never had the opportunity to do when I was growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you already mentioned that now you're working on the screen adaptation of Ghost Girl Banana. What is that like? Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening with that? And when can we expect it to hit our TVs?
If you think publishing takes a long time, then TV and film takes an even longer time, really,
Oh,
because
gosh.
there's so many moving parts and
Mm.
there's funding to be got and interest to be put on board from talent and so forth. I am loving the process. The pilot is now signed off, and I'm going for a very exciting meeting next month, because we do actually have some very exciting interest, which I can't really speak about because it's never done until it's done. But
Yeah.
it's been lovely going back full circle, as I said. And somebody said to me, you've spent so long writing the book. What's it like to still be going with it in a way, but in a different form? And it's so different, the adaptation. We are going more down that
Mm.
thriller route. And so it's like going on a new journey with old friends. And
Mm.
I'm absolutely loving it. Loving working with my team. They've been so incredibly supportive because I've been out of the game for quite a long time, and I didn't think I would be able to do it. And they were like, look, nobody else can adapt this because it's so personal and so heartfelt, and you've got that background. Why wouldn't you do it? And it has been a real joy. And I'm hoping it continues to be, because I would love for it to get picked up and produced, not least because, as I say, I think it's important for people like us to see ourselves on
Yeah.
screen, and not just in token, stereotypical
Yes.
walk on parts, but in proper, fully fleshed out emotional stories.
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely. I can't wait. I really can't wait. I think, and I also love the fact that it's going to go down more the thriller route. As I said, I love watching thrillers,
yeah.
thriller stuff. So I really can't wait for that. But I know you're also working on book 2. Can you tell us a little bit about that, or not yet?
I have just sent the first third to my agent and waiting, but I know that she really likes the idea. All I'll say is that it's a sapphic reimagining of The Remains of the Day, which is one of my
Oh,
favourite books.
yeah.
Very different, but it also features a Chinese woman, and I'm loving writing it. It's taken me a while because I've been so busy with the adaptation and so on. And second books are always notoriously difficult. I'd like to be out of the weeds with this one so I could say I've done 2 books. But yeah, so it's going well. And I'm hoping to finish it very soon and get it out to editors and so forth.
Okay, that's very exciting. And Wiz, it has been so wonderful speaking to you on the show. Thank you so much for your time and your warmth and your wisdom. I can't wait to see what you do next.
It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Samia. Thank you so much again, and for all the incredible work that you do on the podcast. It's really valuable, and I feel honoured to have been chosen to be part of it.
Oh, thank you so much. I enjoyed every moment of speaking to Wiz today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow the Diverse Bookshelf on your podcast platform of choice and connect with me on social media. I would really appreciate it if you can rate and leave a review, as it helps more people find the show.